Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah alladhi wakafa wa salatu wa salamu ala man la nabiyya ba'dahu amma ba'd. Alhamdulillah, this is the Wednesday Majlis that takes place every week. There was a pause during Ramadan, in which we go over a book written by Ibn Atawla Iskandari Rahmatullah alayh, translated into Urdu, added footnotes and commentary by many of our Mashaykh and ulama. The book, originally written by Ibn Atawla Iskandari Rahmatullah alayh, is called Al-Hikam, or the Wisdoms, and they're all statements by an Egyptian Sufi scholar, alim, known as Ibn Atawla, where he talks about spirituality and ruhaniyat, which was then commented on, explained, translated into Urdu, and then published as Ikmal al-Shiyam. This is compulsory reading for those connected to Hazrat Shaykh al-Hadith Moulana Rahmatullah alayh, and all those people in his khanqa often, especially those that do dhikr. Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah alayh would often say to them that do read amongst yourselves two kitabs, Irshad al-Muluk and Ikmal al-Shiyam. Now, Hazrat Shaykh al-Hadith Moulana Rahmatullah alayh, approximately 1968, he wrote a lengthy introduction. The introduction goes into about 80-90 pages. For the last few months, we've been going over little bits and bobs of the introduction, and also a few sections from Ikmal al-Shiyam every week. So continue on with the introduction, which is in English, then inshallah we'll dive into the book in a few seconds, and then the Dhikr Majlis after that. So in the introduction, as Shaykh Rahmatullah alayhi, he's talking about all the different people and Mashaykh that inputted into Ikmal al-Shiyam. So there's Ibn Atawla Iskandari, whose statements, very short, he was the actual author. Thereafter, another great alim, Sheikh Ali Muttaqi from the 16th century in Makkah Mukarramah, originally from India, he went and gave it a different tartib, or he gave it a different order. The Moulana Khalil Ahmad Sarampuri Rahmatullah alayh translated from Arabic into Urdu, and then another great alim, Moulana Abdullah Gangohi Rahmatullah alayh, he wrote a commentary. So right now, Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah alayh is talking about Hazrat Sarampuri, Moulana Khalil Ahmad Sarampuri, the translator. And he translated originally at the behest and instructions of Haji Imdadullah Muhajir Makki Rahmatullah alayh. He says, as the Shaykh says, on their return, so he's talking about his Hajj journey. He says, on their return, Maulana Muhammad Yaqub Sahib Rahmatullah alayh received a letter from Maulana Shamsuddin, Chief Justice of Bahawalpur, requesting a highly qualified teacher. Many qualities stipulated in the letter, and teacher had to be a young man, extremely intelligent, all expert of branches of knowledge, well-mannered, organized, embodiment of virtue, character, and an example for students. So Maulana Yaqub, who was one of the senior teachers at Darul Deoband, he selected Maulana Khalil Ahmad Sarampuri Rahmatullah for the post. So he left the North India and he went to the Punjab, to Bahawalpur. Maulana Khalil Ahmad Rahmatullah would often say he had declined the offer, saying he wasn't adequately qualified. Maulana Yaqub Sahib said, the people of knowledge usually consider themselves in this way. They don't consider themselves to be worthy. You consider yourself unqualified because you still have your seniors above you, but when you go outside, you'll find no one as qualified as yourself. And finally, with the support of Maulana Yaqub Sahib, Maulana Gangohi, Maulana Khalil Ahmad Sarampuri took up the post in Bahawalpur for a monthly salary of just 30 rupees. And in Bahawalpur, he undertook his second Hajj journey, which he himself describes in his diary. The journey is also described in Tazkiratul al-Khalil, his biography, and it took place in the month of Shawwal, 1879. And 2 years later, in 1881, as mentioned in Tazkir Rashid, and the year 1881 as mentioned in Tazkir Rashid is a printing error. And he's on this blessed journey. So he went from India, he went to Makkah Mukarramah, and in Makkah Mukarramah he met his Dada Sheikh, his Grand Sheikh, Haji Imdadullah Rahmatullah alayh, who gave him Khilafat. And this is mentioned in the second volume of Tazkir Rashid in the following words. When the Honorable Moulana made the Hajj to Makkah for the second time, Maulana Gangohi Rahmatullah wrote to Haji Imdadullah, requesting him to confer the mantle of Khilafat to Maulana Khalil Ahmad. On seeing the Maulana, Haji Imdadullah became extremely happy. And during Muharram in 1879, he presented a document of Khilafat adorned with his seal. In a state of elation, he removed his blessed turban from his head and placed it on the Maulana's head. And the Honorable Maulana presented both gifts to Maulana Gangohi and said, I am not deserving of these. So when he came back from India, he took the letter of Khilafat and also the turban, and he presented to his Sheikh Maulana Gangohi Rahmatullah alayh, and he said, I'm not deserving of these. This is only your affection and kindness to me. Maulana Gangohi replied, may these be blessed for you. He then signed the authorization letter, handed it together with the turban to the Moulana, and the respected Hazrat Sarampuri was such that whenever he would take bay'at, he would instruct the murid after having repented for past sins to say, I've made bay'at to Maulana Rashid Ahmad Gangohi at the hands of Maulana Khalil Ahmad Sarampuri. There's a subtle point there. So Maulana Sarampuri Rahmatullah alayh, his instruction was under Maulana Rashid Ahmad Gangohi Rahmatullah alayh. Maulana Rashid Ahmad Gangohi said, right, he's prepared now and he's ready, he's to have Khilafat. So then he's going on a trip to Hajj. So he tells his own Sheikh to give him Khilafat. So he visits Haji Imdadullah, probably tests him to checks the rigor, has the spirituality, is he actually there, has he actually achieved something, he gives him Khilafat. Then Hazrat Sarampuri Rahmatullah, then he returns back, but then Maulana Khalil Ahmad Sarampuri Rahmatullah alayh, although he's got a direct chain to Haji Imdadullah, he doesn't cut his own Sheikh out. He goes to his own Sheikh and he presents the documents to him and the turban to him, and then he then authorizes himself, and then after that Maulana Khalil Ahmad Sarampuri Rahmatullah alayh, if he wanted to, he could give bay'at and say, I'm giving, when he's taking bay'at, he can cut out his Sheikh's chain because he's got Khilafah directly from his grand Sheikh, but he wouldn't out of respect do this, he would always attribute it to his own Sheikh. And in this account, the date Muharram 1879 is a printing error. The Maulana's departure for the Hajj was in Shawwal 1897. And the turban mentioned above is the same blessed turban that Maulana Sarampuri presented to my father, Maulana Yahya Sab, when he granted him Khilafat. And this is also mentioned by Maulana Ashiq Ilahi Sab in Tazkiratul Khalil. He says, the late Maulvi Yahya Sab was my benefactor and sincere friend. So in Tazkiratul Khalil, Maulana Ashiq Ilahi mentions Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah Alayhi's father, Maulana Yahya Sab. He says he's a good close friend. His hidden excellencies and auspicious states require separate volume. After all, he must have been someone for Imam Rabbani Rahmatullah Alayhi, Maulana Gangohi, to love him more than his own children. Maulana Gangohi often said that he was a staff in old age and the eyes in blindness. So as mentioned before, Maulana Gangohi Rahmatullah Alayhi became blind towards the end of his life, and he would rely upon Maulana Yahya Sab as a Sheikh's father to help him and guide him. So he used to refer to him as Ke Andeki Lati, or the staff of the blind person. If we were to disappear for a few minutes for some work, Imam Rabbani would become perturbed and restless. Until Maulana Gangohi Rahmatullah Alayhi's death, he spent 12 years in this way, in love and affection for which there is no pardon. He did khidmat for his Sheikh for 12 years in Gangoh. Maulana Khalil Ahmad Sarampuri, whose foresight had discerned the worth and value of Maulana Yahya Sab 12 years ago, went specially to Gangoh to present with his own hands the turban which Haji Imdadullah presented to him, which had been stitched according to his original folds and preserved. So this turban that Haji Imdadullah gave him, he then took his turban off and then he stitched it according to how it had been tied, and he preserved it in this way. And then when he gave Khilafat himself to Maulana Yahya Sab, so as Gangohi passed away, Maulana Yahya Sab stayed there for 12 years, as Gangohi passed away. Maulana Yahya Sab, we don't know, maybe he got Khilafat, but he was a very humble person, he wouldn't reveal himself. But Maulana Sarampuri then, later on after his Sheikh passed away, he went to Maulana Yahya Sab and he gave him Khilafat for himself. And he took this special turban that he'd been given and he stitched the folds accordingly. And he said, you're deserving of this. Until this day, I was his protector and trustee, and all praises for Allah. Today I've handed the right to the rightful one. I'm now relieved of the responsibility of this trust. And I authorize you to initiate any seeker into the four paths and to show him the name of Allah Almighty. And he continues like this for a few more pages, quite long. Inshallah, we'll continue next week with that. Moving to the actual kitab itself, and this is the hikam. So we're in the chapter or the section regarding ikhlas. Last week we mentioned I think two hikams, guna, that's sin, and disobedience, the amount of tolerance from Allah Almighty that you're in need of at that time. You're in need of more when you carry out an act of obedience, because when a person carries out an act of sin or disobedience, then automatically he has iman inside him, he becomes uncomfortable, he feels discomfort, and because he feels discomfort, what happens is he shows a sense of reliance, need of Allah Almighty. When a person is committing an act of obedience, then he begins to feel himself on a roll. He feels that he's very close. He feels that his connection to Allah Almighty is very close. So in the hikam, Ibn Atawallah says that when a person commits a act of piety, then he's in more need of the tolerance of Allah Almighty and the ihtiyaj of Allah Almighty than he is when he actually commits a sin. Why? Because that feel-good factor that he feels within himself, it detaches himself from his original situation, which is a sense of want and need for Allah Almighty. And there's a beautiful explanation, we covered that last week. He carries on with the same theme. He says here कि तेरा ख्वाहिश करना तेरा ख्वाहिश कर करना कि लोग तेरे आमाल और बातिन अहवाल की खुसूसियत जान लें उबूदियत के अंदर तेरे सच्चा न होने की दलील है. He says, Ibn Atawla says कि your desire that people understand and recognize the perfection, the situation, the high spiritual situation of your actions and your inner self. Ubudiyat ke andar tera sacha na hone ki dalil is a proof that in your servitude to Allah Almighty you're not sincere. What does this mean? Fayda. Ubudiyat or bandagi ke andar sacha hona ye hai. Moulana Abdullah Gangohi Rahmatullah says that when it comes to servitude and being a slave and a worshipper of Allah Almighty, to be sincere in this is कि गैरुल्लाह से नज़र उठ जावे, that your vision, your line of sight is removed from anything aside from Allah Almighty. That when a person performs salah, for example, if he's sincere, he's not bothered about anything aside from Allah Almighty. He's focused on Allah Almighty. When he's carried out amal, then he's focused on Allah Almighty, nothing aside from Allah Almighty. And when a person is sincere, the more sincere is, the more strong this line of sight for him is. He says, और सिवाय अपने रब के किसी की तरफ इल्तिफात न हो, and he should not turn towards anything aside from his Lord Almighty, Allah Almighty. अगर बंदा में ये सिफत मौजूद है, if within the slave this quality is present, तो वो सच्चा है, then this person is truth. If this quality is present, that he doesn't look and he doesn't care about the people, he only cares about Allah Almighty, then he's sincere, he's truthful. अगर ये ख्वाहिश हो कि लोगों को मेरे नेक अमलों की खबर हो जाए, if at the same time he is desirable that people find out and realize and come to understand and come to know of his pious actions, that how much Quran he reads, what time he wakes up in the night, what great actions he's done. और बातनी हालत जो खास मुझ पर गुजर रहे मखलूक को इसकी इत्तला हो. And as he's traversing the path of tasawwuf, the inner spiritual situation, the batini halat, the inner spiritual condition of his, then people come to recognize and they come to know this. और मुख्तलिफ तरीक़ों से उसका इज़हार करता है, and then indirectly through the acts of piety he wants people to find out and know about it, or he uses some sort of stratagem for people to come to know this. तो ये बंदा बंदगी में सच्चा नहीं. Then he says that this person in his servitude and his slavery to Allah Almighty, his worship of Allah Almighty, is not sincere. Why? Because his mind is going towards the general public. और ये ख्वाहिश है उसके सच्चा न होने की दलील. And this desire that's inside him, this is a proof of him not being truthful and sincere. And his sincerity is the first step. That's why Imam Bukhari Rahmatullah alayhi, he begins his Sahih, he says, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. The actions according to intention. But this is a very subtle thing as well. That person carries out actions and then all of a sudden he wants other people to know. And he uses strategies for other people to find out about how pious he is or what actions he's done. Then this is clearly a proof that it's not sincere. He's not sincere in what he wants to do. And as you're traversing the path, a person should always check his intention time and again. He then says, नज़र लुत्फ़ खुदा वंद ताला की अपनी तरफ मुलाहज़ा करके लोगों की नज़र को अपने ख्याल से दूर कर. And then he advises, Ibn Atawla then advises, the next hikam, he advises the reader. He says, नज़र लुत्फ़ खुदा वंद ताला की अपनी तरफ मुलाहज़ा करके, by focusing and observing the kindness of Allah Almighty towards oneself, all the favors Allah Ta'ala has given you. लोगों की नज़र को अपने ख्याल से दूर कर, then turn the vision and turn the people's sight away from you. It doesn't matter about them, they're just makhluk. You got a khaliq, why do you need a makhluk? और तवज्जो व इल्तिफात खुदावंद ताला अपनी तरफ मुशाहदा करके लोगों की तवज्जो इल्तिफात की तरफ मुतवज्जह न हो. And by witnessing or seeing or experiencing the focus of Allah Almighty, that Allah Almighty is there, He's watching me all the time, then what you do is, by focusing on Allah Almighty, you turn away from the focus and the views of other people. Remove that away from you. Explanation. Banda mukhlis ki shan ye hai. He says that a sincere slave, his situation is such कि लोगों की रिदा व आदम रिदा की उसको कुछ परवाह न हो. That he doesn't care about whether people are happy or pleased or not pleased. और हक़ ताला की तरफ नज़र रहमत लुत्फ़ जो हर वक्त उसके हाल पर है पेश नज़र हो. And at all times he is focusing upon the favor and the mercy and the kindness of Allah Almighty, that's on him all the time. मखलूक की नज़र को अपने ख्याल से बिल्कुल निकाल दे, पेश नज़र होकर मखलूक की नज़र को अपने ख्याल. So he focuses on Allah Almighty's focus towards him, and then he removes, by doing this, he removes the creation from his line of sight. He doesn't bother about them. He takes them out of the situation and out of the picture completely. मखलूक उसको खा तहकीर की नज़र से देखे, regardless. So what did he say? और हक़ ताला की नज़र रहमत और लुत्फ़ जो हर वक्त उसके हाल पर है, पेश नज़र होकर मखलूक की नज़र को अपने ख्याल से बिल्कुल निकाल दे. मखलूक उसको खा तहकीर की नज़र से देखे या इज़्ज़त की निगाह से उसकी कोई वक़्त उसके दिल में न हो. Regardless of whether the creation considers him to be despicable, yani they consider him to be completely worthless, या इज़्ज़त की निगाह से देखे, or they consider him to be of someone of honor and respect, उसकी कोई वक़्त उसके दिल में न हो. He doesn't care about it. His focus is solely on Allah Almighty, pleasing Allah Almighty. और हक़ ताला की तवज्जो इल्तिफ़ात, and the focus of Allah Almighty towards him, जो उसके साथ हर वक्त है, which is with him at all times, उसको मुशाहदा करके, that he witnesses and sees this, और उसको अपने लिए बड़ी दौलत जानकर लोगों की तवज्जो इल्तिफ़ात हरगिज़ नज़र न करे. He focuses on Allah Almighty's focus towards him. He considers this to be a great treasure in itself, and then because of this he doesn't care about what the people are looking at. देखो बदी बात है. Then he says that take a look, it's quite obvious. अगर बादशाह वक्त की ख़ास मेहरबानी किसी शख्स पर हो, if the king of the time, a real king of the time, if his focus and his kindness is towards a particular person, और बादशाह वक्त उसके हर हाल का निगरान हो, and the king of that time, he looks after this person, he's taken him under his wing, he looks after this person in everything. तो वो शख्स दूसरे किसी की मेहरबानी करने या इहानत करने की बिल्कुल परवाह न करेगा. Then this person, he won't care whether somebody is kind to him, another person who's not the king, was to be kind to him or was to disgrace him. He doesn't care. Why? Because he's got the king. Pas ahkamul hakimin, or sab badshahon ke badshah. So then he says that the ahkamul hakimin, the one who's the ruler of everything, the badshah of the king of kings, ki nazr inayat har aan mein hamare saath hai. He's looking towards us at all times. Allah Almighty, at every single moment he's with us and he's looking at us. हर दम तरह तरह की नेमतें हम पर उसकी तरफ से मैं की तरह बरस रही है. At every breath, all different types of favors are falling on us like rain falls upon us. उस पर भी अगर ज़ेद व अमर की तरफ हमारी तवज्जो हुई, if at that time our focus is on some ज़ेद व अमर, on some Tom and Harry, then तो हमसे ज़्यादा कौन नाशुक्र होगा? Then how ungrateful will they be? How will there be anyone that's more ungrateful than ourselves? और उसकी सज़ा तो ये है. And then he says, and the punishment of that situation where a person is focusing on Allah Almighty, who's the King of Kings, and the one who showers mercy upon us and his favors at all times. The person who doesn't focus on Allah Almighty, but he focuses upon the creation, उसकी सज़ा तो ये है, his punishment is such कि नेमतें सब सलब हो जावे, that all the favors that Allah Almighty gives, they're taken away from us. मगर रहमत इस कदर बेहिंतहा. But Allah doesn't do this. He carries on. He carries on giving us air, giving us water, giving us shelter, giving us life, giving us breath, giving us money, giving us everything. He continues. मगर रहमत इस कदर बेहिंतहा है, but His mercy is such without any limits कि इस पर भी दरगुजर होती है, that He continues to tolerate us in whichever situation. It doesn't matter. Next one. Ibn Atawla then says, Haq Jalla wa Ala जैसे अमल मुश्तरक रिया आमेज़ को पसंद नहीं फरमाता. That Allah Almighty, in the way He doesn't like an action that is mushtarak, an action in which somebody else is partnered with Him. Amal mushtarak riya ameez ko pasand, that an action which has been adulterated or which has been mixed with ostentation, riya. In the way that he doesn't like this, इसी तरह qalb mushtarak को जिसमें हुब्ब गैर भी मौजूद भी हो महबूब नहीं रखता. In the same way, a heart which is mushtarak, which is also divided between two things, himself and somebody else. Yeah, the love of something else is also there. So he doesn't consider this heart to be beloved. Amal mushtarak ko na kabul farmata hai, in a way that he doesn't accept the amal and the actions that is done for Allah Almighty, but then at the same time is done for the creation as well. na kabul farmate na us par sawab le. He doesn't accept this and he doesn't give reward for this. Ibn Ta'ala mentions this very brief and very concise. The commentator then mentions and he explains amal mushtarak wo hai, that the action that is mushtarak, that has been adulterated, something else has been mixed into it, wo ye hai, is this jisme riya ho, which has ostentation, yani show off, to do an action for somebody else. कि इसमें मखलूक का सा कि उसमें मखलूक का साजा हो गया, ऐसा अमल अल्लाह ताला को पसंद नहीं है. That he's carried out this action for the creation as well. That Allah Almighty doesn't like such actions. इसी तरह qalb mushtarak वो है, in the same way that the qalb mushtarak, the heart which has something adulterated inside it, it's been divided, not just for Allah Almighty but something else. वो है, it's that heart जिसमें Allah गैरुल्लाह की मोहब्बत हो, within which the love of Allah, anything aside from Allah Almighty, its love is also there. ऐसे दिल को भी अल्लाह ताला महबूब नहीं रखते. Such a dil Allah Almighty doesn't consider beloved. अमल मुश्तरक को जो मखलूक के दिखावा के वास्ते किया गया, and in the same way that the amal that has been done for somebody else, for the other creation, ना कबूल फरमाता है, Allah Almighty doesn't accept it, ना उस पर सवाब मिलता है, Allah Ta'ala doesn't give you reward for it. Allah Ta'ala का वो कल्ब महबूब है जिसमें खालिस इसकी मोहब्बत हो. In the same way, Allah Almighty only considers beloved that heart which is purely for His love and which only has His love. और इसी तरह वो अमल उसकी बारगाह आलिम मकबूल है जिसमें रिया और बनावत न हो. And likewise, He only accepts that action within which there is no ostentation, show off, or it is no takalluf, banawat, any fakery or fraudulent activity, as they say. So then he ends it there, and inshallah we'll carry on next week. There's 3 more hikams left on ikhlas, and then after that it goes on to the chapter regarding salah, namaz, and inshallah we'll carry on next week. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallah bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Inshallah be zikr for a little while, and then after that people are happy to go if they wish to go. Bismillah. Actually that's it.